This is Proxy Countdown. Welcome to the big show for the week of May 5th, 2025, alongside my tag team partner, Matt Mascardi. I'm Damian Rawlis. On today's countdown, new CFOs are getting paid at hello. ISS picks watching Netflix over doing its job. Shareholders are mostly sitting on their voting hands at 97 large cap meetings. A classicist shareholder proponent fights the good Aristotelian fight. And on the big vote, Matt test drives his new Blackrock EV AGM Roadster. Let's go right to our trade wire. This week, the focus is on egregious golden hello and goodbye packages. First, State Street's new CFO, John Woods, gets a one-time cash payment of $1 million and then one-time buyout awards consisting of $3 million cash and $12 million in equity. Now, these are just CFOs, Matt. New MongoDB CFO, Michael Berry, will get 2 equity grants, a new hire grant worth $9 million and a sign-on bonus grant worth $3 million. I think it's cute how they each have their own name. Peggy Alford, eBay's new CFO, gets $14 million in new hire equity, along with about $7 million in one-time equity make good payment. Again, they're just coming up with new names.
They're just making stuff up now.
Insulet's new CEO, Ashley McEvoy, gets $15 million in equity, while the former CEO, James Hollingshead, walks away with $8 million, including outplacement services of $25,000. Why he needs that money, I don't know. And a $500 per hour consulting fee for 60 days. So if you see James hanging around a lot in the next few months, I think you know why. And I got to add, this is not bad for a dude who was CEO for nearly 3 years.
Wow, he's got to be tired.
Speaking of getting paid for barely doing anything, retiring Teledyne Technology CEO Edwin Rox, who was hired less than 2 years ago, gets to keep his current pay until September as some made-up title called Strategic Advisor to the Executive Chair. Then he gets $2 million in cash and a bunch of benefits, including $100,000 in outplacement services, $100,000 in relocation costs, and price protection for the sale of his California home in case it's less than the amount he paid for it. How the hell shareholders approve that, I have no idea.
Can I ask what strategic advice a guy who's only been there for a year and 8 months can give?
No idea. And finally, the Carlyle Companies does the right thing and honors its director retirement policy, saying goodbye to Robin Adams, Robert Bone, and Greg Ostrander. Moving over to our proxy cage match. I want to just focus on one this week. We have a fun twist at the proxy cage match between Harley Davidson and H Partners, who are 9% shareholders and have started a withhold vote campaign. So that they're not putting up their own directors. They just have a withhold vote campaign against 3 long tenured directors at Harley: Jochen Zeitz, who's the retiring CEO, Thomas Linnebarger, and Sarah Levinson. Glass Lewis says withhold your vote, but ISS says support. So here is ISS's logic through their lackluster reasoning based on hunches and not performance analytics. ISS revealed without satire that, quote, there are compelling reasons to believe that as a group, the targeted directors still have a perspective that can be valuable.
Can be. Perspective.
Yeah. Compelling reasons to believe.
Compelling reasons to believe. We won't give you those compelling reasons, but we do believe them.
Yeah, I love this. I love
believe
that fight.
That they exist.
Going on at Harley Davidson. And finally, I'm going to move over to the biggest story of the week, and that is our vote results table. Matt, This was a week of research. 97 large cap annual meetings over the past 2 weeks. And yes, I opened up the 8K for every single meeting because I just didn't want to miss any morsel of fun. Although I got to say, there aren't really many morsels of fun
There's no fun anymore.
Despite the fact that the Congress is holding a testimony about the cartel of ISS and Glass Lewis, who purportedly control the will of all shareholders. There's not really much going on. At 97 large cap annual meetings, there are only a total of 73 shareholder proposals. That's it, 73. So it's not like this is a pervasive system that is bringing down corporate America to its knees. And these only came from 41 companies. 56 companies out of all these had no shareholder proposals. So let me cover the results. Here are the wins. I'm calling these the big wins. We had a say and pay win at Molina Healthcare. 59% said no. That's it. That's the only no on say and pay for about 100 companies. Molina Healthcare. We had simple majority vote wins, and this is really the John Chevedden. I'm thinking these are all John Chevedden. Boston Scientific, Duke Energy, Integris. Also, we have wins. Shareholders' ability to call a special meeting that happened at Molina Healthcare, Revity, CMS Energy, Teledyne Technology. So what we're seeing is that some of the old-fashioned governance proposals, and I know, Matt, that you collected data covering this, they are still faring well. So we have 7 big wins there. I've categorized some almost wins. These are the over 30% support votes, and I have made the case repeatedly that just like a controlled company is defined as a company where at least 30% of the votes are controlled by a single entity. I think that if you get 30% of the vote, it should be considered a win. It should be considered that's the will of the shareholder. So these are my almost wins. At Sam Pay, Truist, Citizens Financial Group, Bank of America, Lattice Semiconductor, Pfizer, Goldman Sachs, all had high votes against, including Pfizer, 47% no. Even Goldman Sachs, 34% no. So I think that they should honor this. Let's not forget at Goldman Sachs that DJ DeSaul, the CEO, David Solomon, and I think the COO both got $80 million retention grants just for sitting there. So somehow 66% of shareholders supported that. Also near wins on shareholder approval on excessive golden parachutes. Adobe, 47% yes. Citigroup, 32% yes. Intuitive.
I feel like every near win that you're listing here should be a win, right? Like the companies should be engaging with the investors immediately. Absolutely. And just saying we're going to adopt whatever you're asking.
Here's what I don't understand is that we're seeing routine victories with simple majority voting, with the shareholders' ability to call a special meeting. I don't know why we wouldn't get wins with asking for a shareholder approval on excessive golden parachutes. I outline these excessive payouts routinely. I did at the top of the show. Why wouldn't you let shareholders weigh in on that? Other near wins, independent board chair I want to cover. There are 2 near wins, one at Dover, one at Eastman Chemical, both 30% yes. I don't know why anyone at Blackrock, ISS, Glass Lewis, I don't know why they wouldn't support having a board where the CEO is also not running the agenda. I don't understand that one. I have another list, a category called the shareholder disconnects. So I've been tracking this a lot this proxy season. This is where I just don't understand what what shareholders are thinking about. As an example, at Goldman Sachs, 34% of shareholders said no on pay, but all directors had at least 92% support. I don't get that at all.
Yeah, you don't like what they're doing, but you like them?
Yeah. Likewise, at Truist and Citizens Financial, 41% no on pay, directors over 90%. And that list actually goes on with Lattice Semiconductor, Pfizer, Molina Healthcare, Stanley Black & Decker. All the shareholders pretty upset at pay, but they don't blame the directors.
Look, Molina Healthcare is the worst of that bunch because it was 59% no on pay. That was one of your wins.
Yeah.
And you couldn't say that a majority of investors do not like the pay you've set, but we still like all the people who chose the pay you set.
Yeah.
How is that even logical?
In fact, let's carry that on, Matt. The real winner this proxy season, we should be calling the directors themselves. So I outlined a ton of management proposals and shareholder proposals that either won or nearly won from a shareholder perspective, but who shareholders are not voting against at all are the directors.
Directors, right?
I very carefully, and I want to thank ChatGPT for this, for helping me do math very quickly. I very carefully looked at the filings at 97 large cap meetings. I kid you not, I found only 5 companies where a director even got above a 20% vote against. Just 20%. That was Snap-on, Ball, Moderna, Coca-Cola, American Express. That's it. In fact, no director got above 26% against. Shareholders are not holding directors accountable. End of story.
We know from the data that 0.2% of directors globally are voted out. 0.2%. So if ever there was a protected class of individual, what were the disconnects that you're pointing out clearly just suggest that directors can set whatever policies, strategies, pay, whatever they want to do. And unless they are targeted by an activist, which is their only cases where directors seem to actually get voted out, you are going to get reelected.
Yeah, you pull the data. Shareholders have nothing to say about directors unless an activist steps up, right?
Right.
Which is
that's
suggesting
where we see the biggest drop in votes.
So here's the takeaway: is that investors, whether they are proxy advisories or just actual investors, they are not looking at the director when it comes, because you cannot tell me that anyone is articulating a position on these directors at all. You cannot tell me that, unless maybe occasionally an old-fashioned trigger like they did, they failed attendance standards or something. That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
And finally, I have a category called the oddities. So these are some of the things that stood out to me that I just wanted to point out. First of all, at Domino's Pizza, there was a dirty trick. I hate this dirty trick. We've seen this before. The board introduced a competing proposal to drown out a shareholder's proposal. So a shareholder wanted a group of shareholders holding 15% of shares to have the right to call a special meeting. So the board reacted by putting up its own proposal saying, let's call that number 25%, which is basically impossible. You're not going to get a group of shareholders. 25% is just virtually impossible. And of course, that won. That beat the shareholder vote. So that's a dirty trick over there in Pizza Land. How about this one? I love this one. At Berkshire Hathaway, we've been talking about Berkshire Hathaway. Warren Buffett is stepping down as CEO. I'm going to call this the old man's club, Berkshire Hathaway. They had this antiquarian 8K filing where they actually are the winner of shareholder proposals. They had 7. That's the most out of the 100 I looked at. And yet, Matt, they were the only company who refused to take any of that voting seriously. They're the only ones in their 8K filing who wouldn't even tell you what shareholders were voting on. They just numbered them, and that's it. That's it. Couldn't even bother to tell you what people were voting on.
Good for them, because
arrogance.
They're a dual class company, and it doesn't matter.
Okay, right? Well, I'll accept that. I'll accept that as an answer.
And not to mention the fact that when you read their proxy, like their rebuttal to the shareholder proposals, are so casually indifferent to the asks. I mean, they often just say Berkshire Hathaway follows all relevant laws.
Yeah,
that we don't need to do this.
They don't take the process seriously.
They don't care about it at all.
Care.
And why would you? You're Warren Buffett.
Well,
what do you care?
I suppose that's true, except that he's created this image of being like the greatest friend to shareholders ever. But that just really means share price.
He made them money. Yeah, he made them money.
The other interesting thing...
The irony being, to that point, right? If we love the Warren Buffett because he made you lots of money, TSR was the thing, we do not hold other directors or even CEOs accountable at the same level. We don't do the analytics the same way for everyone else. So the cuddliness or lack of cuddliness should transfer to other board members. If you sat on a board of a company that just stunk, get rid of them.
Here's the crazy irony at Berkshire Hathaway, which I found astounding. So if any of our listeners have insight into this, please reach out. The 7 shareholder proposals performed extremely poorly. They ranged in support from 0.7% to 3.5%, by far the lowest I saw at any of the companies. And to your point, Matt, these shares are controlled by Warren Buffett and his family, right? So he's just saying no to all of them. But here's the odd thing. I pointed out before that no shareholders are holding directors accountable anywhere. But at Berkshire, five directors actually had over 10% votes against, which just shocked me. Like, what, of all places?
This is such reverse logic. I don't understand anything that's happening. Right? I don't understand it.
Very interesting over at Berkshire Hathaway. Coca-Cola, I wanted to point out a couple of shareholder proposals. They're actually in second place for having 6 shareholder proposals. One of them was called an assessment of non-sugar sweeteners. It just made me laugh. I don't know why.
Something about assessing a non-sugar sweetener?
Here's my assessment. Non-sugar sweeteners are weird. How about that for an assessment? Just drink water. What are we doing here, people? And then this one just made me laugh. I think in our prediction show, I actually predicted that we're going to see an increase in board level committees. I don't remember why, but I thought maybe now is a fun time to expand committees on boards. But the anti-woke... one of the anti-woke political theater groups, the National Center for Public Policy Research, they actually asked for the creation at Coca-Cola of something called the Improper Influence Board Committee. I shit you not.
Ooh,
they want a board committee whose only mandate is to sit there with a giant fly swatter, getting rid of any decision that benefits the climate, Black people, women, and human rights. I kid you not. It's just to shoot down climate, DEI, and human rights. That's all it's there to do. It made me laugh. I had to, and I got to tell you that it's the only thing weirder than that I found. Only thing that's weirder than non-sugar sweeteners is a committee just to swat down DEI stuff.
If I'm honest, I'm a little disappointed it got as many as 0.84% of the vote.
Yeah, well,
I'm a little disappointed.
I will tell you that the non-sugar sweetener has got 11% support. So, okay, at Wynn Resorts, I like this one. A proposal wanted a report on the potential cost savings through the adoption of a smoke-free policy for the company's properties. I just love this. Because imagine how annoying it is cleaning all those yellow stained walls in room 1537.
I would love to see that cost benefit analysis. Yeah.
That only got 9% support. And finally, 2 from we talk about John Chevedden a lot for good reason. We talk about Jim McRitchie a lot for good reason. These are the old, I call them the OG governance gadflies, right?
Yeah, but a lot of G's. OGGG.
But I got another G for you. A guy we've been leaving out. He's a classicist. Okay, this is all serious. He's a classicist named Jing Zhao, right? He's actually been a shareholder proponent since about 2013. We see his name coming in and out.
I've seen it as far back as 2010, but consistently since 2013.
And I'm going to give you a couple examples of 2 proposals that he listed that were voted on in the last 2 weeks. He really is a classicist. In fact, he uses Aristotle frequently to demonstrate why he wants shareholders to support his proposal. And to your point, Matt, that you made to me in the pre-production, I love it, but it could be hurting your case because I think
stop talking about Aristotle.
0.00001% of the globe now even understands who Aristotle is. But I love you, Jing. But here are 2 of the proposals, both of which I wholeheartedly support. At Intuitive Surgical, he asked the board to, quote, improve the executive compensation program by actually considering the CEO pay ratio. He's actually the only shareholder I've ever seen that says, hey, you list this data point, why don't you do something with it? He claims that, quote, Aristotle demonstrated that in a stable community, the ratio of the rich citizens' land to the poor citizens' land should not be over 5 to 1. hey, look, I think that might be a little bit low. I'm an advocate for. I'll start the bidding at 100 to 1. I would love to see. No company should be 100 to 1. Although in my heart, I think maybe even 10 to 1. Or I'm actually with you, Jing. But I know that that's never going to fly. But I'm a believer in you, Jing. How about this one? This is something that I have actually been advocating on this show and all of our other shows, and I think this is an absolute no-brainer. At Bank of America, Jing requested the nomination of more director candidates than board seats. Essentially, Matt, setting up a contest where shareholders have the right to choose who they think should actually be on the board, not just to approve a slate of directors. Now, where this could get tricky, I actually think that where we should do this is, why don't we start doing this just with the first time a director is nominated? So whenever a director is new to the board, there should be a competing slate of, say, at least like 3 directors, right? Let the shareholders choose.
7.
Because if you do it every year, I could see it being a bit chaotic. But I'm still for it. But anyway, classicist shareholder.
Look, let me ask
proponent,
you,
Jing Zhao.
I'm going to spend some time on this anyway. But
go ahead.
We'll do this cliffhanger, and then you can intro the big vote.
Yeah, let's move over to the big vote. Actually, I'm done. And by the way, to our listeners, I know we have listeners who use this show for research and because I talked to her actually. Yeah, listener. We do a lot of research. We have a lot of information. If you want to take a peek at my notes for the 97 companies that we covered, reach out to us. I'm happy to share any of this.
There's a lot. Yeah,
I'm happy to share any of this.
It's a lot of research.
Reach out to us. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So this week I chose Blackrock as our company. There are a lot of votes coming up, and it's hard to choose just one company. I thought about doing a series of companies, but in this case, I actually focused on just Blackrock, and in part because of Jing Zhao. I'll ask this at the top. He's talking about effectively having a draft pool of directors every single year, right? That's what he's saying. He's saying nominating committee, the ask is, don't give us your 10 directors, the incumbents. Give us more than the existing board. So if you've got, at BlackRock, you're talking about 16 directors. You got 16 directors. You have to nominate 33 directors every single year. And you let investors pick out of the 33 who they want. Mm-hmm. Now, the reality is investors will just choose incumbents over and over again.
Yeah, I was going to say, just like the American political system, the incumbents will win. So don't get too worried here.
But the point is actually a good one. Let's go through BlackRock first, and we'll come back to this.
Well, before you get to that, can I just say this? This only benefits too, if any recruiting firms are listening to, headhunter type firms, this only benefits other people, right? Especially directors who've never been a director before, because it puts your name on the map. It lets people see your bio. This could be a great benefit to women, to people of color, right? I mean, it's just a way of sharing their expertise, their resumes, right? So this doesn't hurt anyone. But go ahead, Matt.
So BlackRock's AGM is on May 15th, so it's coming up fast. So you've got to make a choice. And BlackRock is an interesting case because BlackRock is the biggest owner of one of the 2 biggest owners between BlackRock and Vanguard of U.S. companies. There's over 2,000 companies in the U.S. where they are a 5% or more holder as of 12/31 of last year. But that remains true basically in perpetuity. They're a massive holder. They have a tremendous ability to exert power on companies or abdicate that power, right? By just voting with management, which is largely what they do. But they actually included in what they do, and this is part of the reason why I chose them, because this is like this curious loophole in the way capital markets work. They can vote for their own directors.
Right.
And they can do it because the money that they're voting is their client's capital. So then they have teams of stewardship inside, and they have to cast votes. And you can, technically, they can vote for their own directors because they're voting on behalf of their own clients, right? So because of that, they have this weird ability to both vote on everybody else's directors and their own. But they can vote on their own in more than one place. So of the 16 directors on BlackRock, only a handful are not on multiple boards. In fact, in our database, there's only 2 that haven't been on multiple boards at all in our data. So there are 16 directors. They actually hold 15 board seats outside of BlackRock right now.
Right.
The boards that they have seats on include Verizon. BlackRock owns 8.5% of Verizon. Cisco, 9.2%. iHeartMedia, 13.3%. U.S. Steel. BlackRock is the largest owner of U.S. Steel at 11.7% of the company. And they have a director on their board where they're voting at U.S. Steel, right? This is very strange because when you are electing directors there, they are actually electing their own directors elsewhere and there.
It's strange. I've never seen this before where a company can vote on its own, on themselves, essentially.
Well, so I got curious about this because what I wanted to know is there a difference between how they vote on their directors and how other people vote on their directors? So I looked at the vote results for 13 of their directors last year. 3 of their directors got votes below the 25th percentile of all vote getters globally. And yes, that number is still ridiculously high. It's like less than 94% approval. That's the 25th percentile, okay? Mm-hmm. But they got below the 25th percentile for all vote getters globally. And that was Cheryl Mills at iHeartMedia. She got 93.2% of the vote. Charles Robbins at Cisco, he got 91.1% of the vote. And Hans Vestberg at Verizon, who's the CEO of Verizon, 90.2% of the vote, right? You got nearly 10% vote against. In every one of those cases, BlackRock voted for their own directors, including when those directors were in the bottom quartile. BlackRock uniformly votes for its own directors. Now, to be fair, they vote for almost every director. They rarely oppose a director. But they can sway the vote themselves in some of these cases, right? So when you look at who got the highest votes at BlackRock, you will be surprised to know that Charles Robbins, who got in the bottom quartile of votes globally at Cisco, got 99.6% for at BlackRock.
Wow.
Hans Vestberg got the bottom quartile, 90% vote for at Verizon, got 99.65% vote for at BlackRock.
Wow.
So these are people that when you go elsewhere, other shareholders don't like them, but at BlackRock, they get all the votes. And I wanted to check, are these people where BlackRock can just casually ignore performance? And it turns out Vestberg on the BlackRock board is the second worst TSR performer on the board at bats 329. And overall, he's the worst performer. Robbins is the third worst on TSR. These are directors that demonstrably underperform in all the places they go, but they get 99.6% of the vote for at BlackRock, and they get less of everywhere else. In fact, Robbins and Vestberg are connected through Dan Schulman, who's on both the Cisco and Verizon boards. So these are connected directors to boot. And they don't fit in the knowledge mix. They don't have core knowledge of investing. So they're not even inside the core knowledge mix of what it takes to be in BlackRock.
Go ahead.
Which is what makes the shareholder proposal from Jing Zhao so interesting to me. Okay? Here's what he wrote. He asked, shareholders recommend that BlackRock reform the election of the board to list more candidates than the number of directors of the board to be elected. His reason: the American corporate boards and executives have become a class of oligarchy as defined by Aristotle according to his Politics. His treatise Politics.
Sounds like a fan of our other show, Business Pants. Yeah, go ahead.
What's fascinating about it is this guy is basically saying these directors are a protected class. It is an oligarchy. Absolutely. Right? And he's saying shareholders, in order to disrupt the oligarchy, you break up oligarchy with democracy. Shareholders should have to choose from more candidates than the number of directors on the board. That is the natural way to break up an oligarchy, by giving shareholders a voice. He doesn't acknowledge the fact that shareholders are their own oligarchy, right? The big three own on average 25% of every single company in the United States. But they actually know that they're an oligarchy. And how I know that they know is BlackRock's response.
Okay.
Here's what BlackRock had to say about this. And the reason I'm saying all this is because as a shareholder, if you're a shareholder in BlackRock, you have to make a choice about who sits on that board. They have to represent you. This is what BlackRock thinks about allowing you to have more say on boards, particularly theirs, but also boards, because BlackRock is a voter. Right. So if you think of them saying this in the context of every company, not just themselves, if they were saying this about every company, they obviously are against the proposal, but they're effectively saying we are against more democracy. We've got enough democracy. We're against it. This is why this is their reasoning. Quote, having competing nominees would result in contested elections, which may in turn discourage collaboration among our directors, politicize the election process, and deter talented candidates.
Okay.
So just that sentence says a lot. It says directors don't want a contest for the position. They don't want a competition.
Yeah, that part is clear to me. The reasoning I don't see any proof of. But yeah, that is the clear takeaway, right? No, we don't want this. No, we want.
Well, they effectively, BlackRock goes on to say that the nominating committee is in the best position to assure appropriate board composition and serve our shareholders' long-term approach.
Which Glass Lewis has parroted recently by saying, right, that we essentially believe in whatever the nominating committee says.
That's right. That they're effectively saying that exactly that, and they're saying this is burdensome for management, and the nominating committee would not be effective. It would not be effective use of the nominating committee or the board's time or BlackRock's resources. But think of it. Every sports team, you actively have to compete for a spot on the team.
Of course.
You're competing for contract dollars.
Always.
That's year in and year out.
Yeah.
And they are effectively saying the nominating committee will select one person per slot.
Yeah.
And you should just trust them to do that. You should not be trusted yourself to choose among multiple. As I say to the GM of a sports team, like, I'm sorry, you can only choose one position per year to change, and you can only choose yes, no, the one person that we allow you to choose as the team.
Yeah,
the team basically saying, this is who we want. You say yes or no. That's it. You don't get to pick again.
Not to mention that there are several mechanisms in place at most companies that even if the shareholder voted out a director, the company does not have to honor that vote.
Of course, because a lot of these are non-binding. Right?
Yeah,
like a lot of these are non-binding.
Plurality voting standards. Yeah.
But politicizing the election process is exactly what should happen. We don't
Especially
know what
in a democracy.
The directors stand for.
It's the whole idea of a democracy, no?
You don't know if a director stands with you or against you on dividends or buybacks or, like, we have data at Free Flow Analytics about that kind of thing. But for the most part, most investors do not know whether or not these directors strategically are aligned with them unless you can get in the boardroom with them, which they only reserve that. In fact, BlackRock says you don't need to do this because we have talked to our shareholders. They said one of the reasons why this is not useful is in 2024 we offered engagement with shareholders collectively holding approximately 65% of our common stock. They did not say that 25% of that. The 65%, fully 25% of the stock is held by Vanguard, State Street, Temasek, who's a partner of BlackRock's, Bank of America, and BlackRock themselves.
Yeah.
They are one of the owners.
Yeah.
So what are we actually talking about here, right? You're not talking to all shareholders. You're talking to yourselves, effectively. You're just talking to yourselves.
It almost seems like what they're most afraid of is the possible increase of disclosure if this were to happen, right? Because we'd have to learn more about what these directors are up to.
We'd have to actually hold them to some sort of standard. We'd have to say, what is it we want our directors to be?
It would be a meritocracy, would it not?
Well, and that gets to the next part, which is fascinating to me. They said it will, quote, deter talented candidates.
Yeah, there's no proof of that either. Yeah, go
Bank
ahead.
of America,
no proof.
Jing Zhao's proposal there, they said all three of the exact same thing. Their reasoning was exactly the same there as it is here.
Yeah.
Blackrock is a massive, the largest asset manager in the world. First or second, depending on if it's Vanguard or BlackRock, right? You're saying that you could not attract talent, being the largest asset manager of the world, to the board?
It's made up.
Not to mention the fact, imagine if I said that about middle management. Imagine if I said, because I got 2,000 applicants for this job, that deters the best candidates because it looks like there's a lot of people applying for this job. It looks like they're not going to get it. Doesn't that increase competition for the best?
Yeah, there's also no world in the foreseeable future where executives won't want to serve on the world's largest boards. They absolutely will. What it's suggesting is that, which you pointed out at the top, is that it is a protected class, and they want to keep it a protected class.
Exactly. The end game here is, and the last thing they say here is that they have proxy access, right? Well, I read the bylaws, the 2012 bylaws, which was the most recent I could find, where they actually, the rules for proxy access is they have to have given shareholder notice to the secretary. It must be delivered to or mailed and received at the principal executive offices not less than 120 days, but not more than 150 days prior to the anniversary of the mailing date of the proxy materials, immediately preceding the annual meeting of stockholders, provided that in the event the annual meeting is called for a date that is not within 30 days before and after the anniversary date of such a meeting, notice by the shareholders in order to be timely must be received not later than the close of business on the 10th day following the day on which notice of the date of the annual meeting was mailed to stock.
Matt, I actually calculated that while you were talking. It's a Thursday in March. I think they're allowed.
It's literally
that's the day they can mail that.
The day that you can get the proxy access. This is the definition of a protected class.
No, maybe it's November.
So regardless of his his quoting Aristotle here,
which I love,
100% true. Mm-hmm. That this is the definition of a protected class. You have set up so many barriers to adopting any sort of competition, new entry. You are the gatekeeper in perpetuity. There's so many barriers that you are effectively, and then you outline all the barriers yourself in your own rebuttal to the shareholder proposal.
There's no proof to some of that logic, by the way. But I will add that another example of the fact that it's a protected class is that the board, less than 0.001% of the time, even agrees with a shareholder proposal.
Never. Yeah, almost never.
They just say, no, we have this, we got this. It's a different way of being a protected class, but you're right. This is actually suggesting that the directors themselves are protected people.
So regardless of whether you agree with the proposal itself to have a double +1 board election every single year, what it does show you is exactly what that we say, and you can see in the data, which is these people are not protecting shareholder interests. In fact, they don't trust you to make a choice at all about who's on this board.
They
just want you to say yes.
They're protecting management.
They're protecting their own interest, and they lay out exactly why they think, the ways that they want to combat you from changing anything.
To your point, Matt, incumbents will win 98% of the time. So even if you let this system forward, the vote's all going to go to the incumbent anyway. So all you're really doing is coming up with a system that gives shareholders input on every new director. Just let them decide who the next person should be. And by the way, it's not like shareholders have much control over who they get to nominate. So BlackRock could very cleverly nominate 3 people that, when you squint, are really the same candidate anyway. So,
or conversely, like this year, BlackRock nominated no new directors.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
And it's a 16-person board, 3 of whom are the founders of the company that are still on this board.
And as I covered earlier, I looked at 97 meetings at large cap companies. I think only 5 directors got over 20% no, which suggests that even in this system, you're not going to get any dissent anyway. They're going to go with the incumbency. So why not at least try to start opening up the system to shareholders, let them be more involved?
So here's what to do about it, right? Because I analyzed this board. There are underperformers on this board. I pointed them out in Robbins and Vestberg. I've analyzed, like the structure of this. And the most interesting thing is really the philosophical question of what is the corporate democracy here. And we've talked about this before. We've had interviews on the show talking about it. We've talked about it ad nauseum. I think you vote yes on the shareholder proposal because it is a true opportunity to innovate in democracy and corporate governance. And you're innovating at the ultimate voter of other companies.
Yeah, why not a BlackRock?
If you can pass it here, right? There is no reason why BlackRock will not start going to other companies and saying, like, look, we know what this looks like now, and you should do it too. We should have the option as a voter on boards to choose the boards we want, not the ones you give us, right? Mm-hmm. Every election should be a contested election. I've never heard of an election that's that everyone thought it was a good idea to be uncontested, which is what they want for every board election, uncontested elections. Number 2, vote out Vestberg and Robbins as the 2 lowest performers. You have justification to do that because Vestberg and Robbins, they flatly underperformed. There are 39 active loops between directors on Vestberg's Verizon board, and all of them underperform. Vestberg underperforms not just here, but on Verizon. Verizon's board actually has returned 388 in TSR as a group, 264 in controversies, and they have 0 directors batting above 500. On Verizon board, Vestberg is the CEO there. This is a pattern and it's consistent. He's an underperformer and he knows the people on his board. That is true also at BlackRock. BlackRock has voted for all of them. You actually solve 2 problems here. You get someone like Vestberg off your board. You can justifiably vote against him at Verizon where he also underperforms. You need to stop giving yourself a conflict of interest where you can't vote against somebody because they're on your board, right? Robbins is the same. He bats under 500 on TSR. Robbins has Dan Schulman on his board. Vestberg does too. These aren't coincidences. These are underperformers who basically in uncontested elections hand each other board roles. These are easy votes. And you also vote against the founders. I don't care. You can choose one to keep. If you want to keep just Fink on the board, great. Do you really need the 3 founders still on the BlackRock board after 30-ish years, 25 years? Do we really need all of their opinions? And it's a 16-person board. Do we need 3 of those slots taken by founders? Give it to somebody else. So those are my suggestions. Vote yes on the shareholder proposal and vote no on Vestberg, Robbins, and the founders, Fink, Caputo, and Wagner.
I think you said it all, Matt. Anything else you want to add? Can we get out of here?
No.
That's the proxy countdown for the week of May 5th, 2025. Join us next week when we jump back into the alternative democracy pool. Forever on the lookout for shareholder shenanigans, dopey directors, scandalous CEO pay ratios, and yes, wayward bandits.